Hi there, Tiffin owners. Today in your 2018 Tiffin Allegro Open Road, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install SumoSprings for the rear axle. You can see the upper portion is attached to the frame and the lower section here is attached to our axle on the leaf spring stack here. And it has constant contact between both, and it operates somewhat similarly to like a jounce bumper. The factory jounce bumper is located there. You can see it is much smaller, but the big difference is that our SumoSpring here is in constant contact all the time. Our factory jounce bumper there has probably got a gap that's about this big before it's ever going to even contact the axle. So that guy there is more for once your suspension has fully bottomed out, you get a little bit of rubber there to cushion it at the end to keep any metal contact from occurring. Our SumoSpring here is going to act dynamically throughout its compression range, compressing up to 80%. With this spring here, every time you hit a bump on the road, rather than the impacts just traveling down your suspension into the frame, up into the cab for your passengers, a lot of that's going to be absorbed here into our SumoSpring, so you're going to get a much smoother ride. Whenever you're driving down the road and you have a heavy crosswind or you make an evasive maneuver, your motorhome tends to sway. The body will move to the left or to the right to compensate for the weight and the movement that's going on. Our SumoSpring here wants to stay in its normal position here. So if the motorhome does go to sway, we'll say it's swaying towards us here. That means the body's going to swing towards us, the frame's going to get a little bit closer to the axle, and we're going to compress the spring. Well, that's going to push back, reducing how much sway we had. And since there's one on the other side, when it pushes back, the one on the other side is going to also be pushing back to help keep our motorhome upright. So our SumoSpring here really affects just about every portion of our suspension and how it interacts with our motorhome. You're going to get a smoother ride, you're going to reduce your sway, you're just going to have an overall better time driving your motorhome with these installed. You can also get these for the front axle as well as the rear. We've put a set on the rear here, and we're also going to be putting a set on the front to make it even smoother for our customer here. We'll begin our SumoSpring installation here at the back of our vehicle. Now, I've already lifted up the back using the leveling jacks on my vehicle and put a jack stand under the frame to support it. But that's because I have an impact that I know is going to be powerful enough to remove the lug nuts. If you guys don't have a big old impact, because he's torqued to upwards of close to 500 foot-pounds, if you don't have a big impact like this, what you'll want to do is before you lift it up, you'll want to go through and break each one of these nuts loose by hand, so that way after you do lift it up, you can actually get them off of there. But we have a strong enough impact, so we've got ours already lifted. You can see the wheels off the ground. We've got our jack stand under the frame. There's a couple of things we got to remove to get this piece off of here. First is our lug nut covers. Each of the lug nuts have a cover on them. We're just going to use these tools. You can honestly just pull it off by hand. They're kind of tough, but it is doable to do it by hand. But if you got one of these tools, it works a lot better. You can get these here at e-trailer. They grip on there for you and give you a little bit easier time removing them. There you get a little more leverage with this tool. So we'll get each one of these pulled off of here, and then the next thing we need to do is remove the center cap. This middle piece here is actually a giant bolt that threads in. So this will take a pretty big socket. I think it's like 2 1/4 roughly. We don't have one that size, so we're just going to use a big pair of channel locks here, and we'll use a cloth to protect our hub from damage. And that piece will just rotate off of there, so just take your time and remove it from there. So it feels like it's actually getting tighter, and it's not uncommon for one side to be regular thread and the other side to be reverse thread. So we're gonna try going the other direction as if we're tightening and see if that gets looser. So it does appear that on the driver's side here, this one is reverse thread. So you would actually be turning it clockwise to loosen it. Over on the passenger side, it's just regular thread, not reverse thread. And your lug nuts can sometimes be that way as well. So pay attention to that. Now that we've got all that out of the way, we can finally get the wheel off of there. This guy does have tire pressure sensor monitors, so I'm going to remove the one for the inside wheel, so that way the valve stem slides through the rubber piece there. We're just going to set this inside the hubcap so we don't lose it. And now we'll remove these. I'm gonna start by trying to just take them off, just regular, non-reverse thread. Usually if it's reverse thread on it, you'll see an L stamped in it. And I don't see the L, so we're gonna hit it real quick and see if it comes off with standard direction. We're using a 1 5/16 socket to remove these. And the lug nuts are gonna be just standard thread, so we'll just zip each one of these off of here and we can get our wheel out of the way. Once you've got your last lug nut removed, we can take our wheel off of there. Now we do sell wheel dollies and stuff like this that here at eTrail that you can slide under here to take your wheel off. Me personally though, I found that the pry bar is probably the best tool for the job. You've got one probably laying around. Bigger is better. This pry bar is a bit on the small side for what I would prefer for this job, but it's what we got here. So, and it's big enough, but bigger will be better. So you'll put it underneath and then just kind of lift up on it a little bit and just pull outward. And look at that. I mean, it just can't be any easier than using a pry bar. I'll just roll this one away and we'll take the other one off the same way. You got to do a little bit of pre-assembly. Here's the SumoSpring. It's got a single hole on one side. That's the lower portion of our spring. And then on the other side, when we flip it over, you can see we've got 4 holes, 2 that are close together and 2 that are far apart. The 2 that are far apart are the ones we want to use. That's for our top bracket. So we'll go ahead and set our top bracket on there, line up the holes in the top bracket here with the holes in the top of the SumoSpring. We can then go ahead and take the shorter bolts that come in our kit, thread those into the top of the bag, and snug them down with a 9/16 socket. Next, we'll flip our bag over here for our lower one. Go ahead and take your lower bracket. It's got a single hole in it. That will line up with that single hole. Go ahead and thread that in place. We're gonna not snug this one all the way down yet. Just kind of put it in hand tight. We need to be able to rotate it. We can come back in on the side with a wrench and finish snugging that down at a later step, but we want to be able to line this up properly. So our SumoSpring here is gonna sit on top of our leaf spring stack like this with the hook facing rearward. So we're gonna go ahead and set it in place. That hook will hook around the U-bolt that's on your axle, the U-bolt that is towards the front of the vehicle. So that'll line up there. That little hook, make sure it is hooked around your leaf spring, and it's supposed to just kind of touch up against the leaf spring, and this is where it will sit on our leaf spring stack. After you've got it sitting up there, grab the carriage bolts out of your kit. Those are going to drop down through the square holes in the lower bracket. And there's one on the other side over here. Then we can take the strap and 2 of the nuts in the kit and put that on bottom. So here we have our strap, and this strap can be installed in 2 different ways. You can install it like this, which is the preferred method, or you could install it like this, which will give you additional threads. And either way is perfectly fine, but if you find that you don't have enough thread sticking through when you put your strap on, this way it'll get you a little bit more threads. This way is a little bit less. So we're gonna go with this method because we got plenty sticking through. So we'll slide that onto our carriage bolts that we slid down. And you can flip this thing around too. If you look, it does have a little notch cut in it. So if you need that notch for clearance on either side, you can flip that around as necessary. So we're just gonna slide it in place there. Push it off to the side just a little bit. That can help put a little bit of pressure on the bolt so it won't push up when you're trying to thread your nut on it. We'll get the nut threaded on the other carriage bolt, and then we'll tighten it down. We're going to use our 9/16 socket once again with our carriage bolts here. You want to take a hand and just put a little bit of downward pressure on the bolt you're snugging down. That'll keep it down in the square hole so it won't be able to rotate. And I just snug it up until it touches the bottom. Then I'm going to move to the other U-bolt, or the other carriage bolt, and snug that one down. And then we'll go back to this one, just go back and forth, making sure they're all the way snug. Once you get your bottom all strapped down, the next thing we're going to do is I placed a floor jack under the axle on this side. Our lower hole we want to put directly dead center on our frame. Same with the front and rear on the lower holes. So just go ahead and measure your frame. Make sure you put it center. All right, we got a 9-inch frame here, so 4.5 is center, so that's right about where we want to be right there. So now we're going to drill out our holes. You'll want to make sure you have at least 2 holes on each side drilled out and bolted on. There's a total of 6, so you get an extra one. The lower holes recommended to be used, but the upper ones here, you can choose either one, because if you have a fuel line or some sort of obstruction on the other side of the frame that's going to inhibit you from installing one here, you can potentially go a little bit lower or a little higher. So we're going to actually install ours in the middle one right there. So that's the hole we're going to drill out, is there and here. And then we'll look on the other side of the frame and verify if we're going to use the upper or middle hole on this one. And it is going to vary depending on motorhome, depending on the options you've got. So you really don't want to follow along exactly what we're doing. You want to look on the other side of your frame and verify what you have on yours, because the exact same motorhome and assembly is built likely by a different guy that builds it, and he can put the components slightly higher or lower on the frame. So that's why it's so important that you do your own due diligence and verify before drilling. We're going to use a little bit of silicone spray, helps it drill out a little bit easier. And then we're going to grab a 3/8 drill bit and drill this out. All right, so we got that drilled through. I like to make sure I put my bolt through and start a nut on it before moving on to the next hole. You don't need to fully tighten it down. This will just ensure that when you go to drill your next hole, you don't push the bracket off to where your holes don't line up anymore. All right, and then we'll repeat that process for the 3 remaining holes. All right, so we went ahead and repeated it on each one, and then we can just go back now with our wrench and gun and snug them all down. Once you've got each one of those snugged down up there, down below we have that single bolt that we left loose so we could get that proper angle for everything here. We're going to go back with our 9/16 wrench and just snug that up on bottom here. All right, that's our last bolt. Everything looks good on this side. So we can go ahead and reinstall our wheels, and we're going to perform the exact same procedures over on the other side to get that one installed. I do recommend doing one side entirely and then move it over to do the other side. And that completes our installation of SumoSprings on the rear axle of our 2018 Tiffin Allegro Open Road.